All units proceed to your post assignments. All units proceed to your post assignments.
Thank you for your service, Daniel Ellsberg. You are a beautiful and courageous soul who has lived a beautiful and courageous life. May your remaining days be your best and brightest. Go in peace, knowing that we will carry on the fight.
In the first year of marriage, we're talking about him going to prison for the rest of his life.
Are girls forgiven the concern about the possibility of going to prison for this?
We have a quick back.
Wouldn't you go to prison to tell son this war?
And we continue to pay tribute to the legendary Daniel Ellsberg, great source of inspiration for many of us, a great role model. He lives in Berkeley, the San Francisco Bay Area, where we were scheduled to do several events on the weekend of March 18th and 19th. Unfortunately, we have to postpone, and we'll do our best to reschedule as soon as possible. We know we have a lot of supporters there. In fact, when we did a poll a few weeks ago and asked where people would want to see a Scott Ritter event, it was the San Francisco Bay Area that had the most interest of the states on the West Coast. So stay tuned and we'll reschedule as soon as possible. We are going to be in Texas on March 28th, 29th, and 30th. And thanks to our friends Ryan and Pat and their friend Janice, who did a lot of legwork, came up with some great situations for us. So really looking forward to that. And as I mentioned last week, Scott's book is now available if you want it autographed. Unfortunately, just U.S. so far. We'll get back to you about maybe the rest of the world in the near future. But if you're in the U.S., you can go to scottrittermerch.com and buy an autographed copy of the book. He'll personally autograph it, according to however you would like it. Up to a point, right, Scott? You're not going to write another book within the book. Like 20 words is the maximum. That's fair, right?
I'll do 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. I mean, look, if you want to buy an autographed book, I'm going to autograph the book for you. And the first batch has gone out. I mean, I received from Jeff the list, and I have autographed, and I have bought the mailers, and I have hand walked them to the post office, where the postal authorities look at me with dismay as I lumped a good number of books in front of them, and they were glad to send them out. So you will be receiving them shortly.
All right. A well-oiled machine. Fantastic. Let's get to the questions from our beloved audience. This is Ask the Inspector every Friday night. We spend a couple of hours answering questions in great detail. We start the podcast with the questions that were submitted in advance at our Substack, which is scottritterextra.com. And then in the latter half, we take questions live coming in on Facebook and YouTube. The first is from Walter in West Virginia. Do you think that the people of Taiwan, watching the ongoing destruction of Ukraine as a country, might be having second thoughts about the U.S. vow to protect them from a Chinese invasion? And let me show you the second question too, Scott, because it's a similar topic. If a conflict breaks out over Taiwan, will China go after American military bases in the Pacific?
Well, I'll start with the second one first. If conflict breaks out in Taiwan, China will not go after American military bases in the Pacific unless American military bases in the Pacific are used as a platform from which to launch attacks against China. I hope the United States understands that you don't get to attack China risk-free. You don't get to fly bombers from Guam, for instance, and fire cruise missiles that impact targets on the Chinese mainland or on Hainan Island or elsewhere, or sink Chinese ships in the Pacific, and then land in Guam and assume that nothing's going to happen. Guam will be targeted. Any installation that's used to support any military action by the United States against China will be targeted. It becomes a legitimate target of war. And that could include basically Pearl Harbor, where the commander of the Pacific Fleet hangs out. That's a command and control target. It's a logistic support target. So I just certainly hope that people understand the ramifications of talking tough. I mean, we had General Minahan, the general, the U.S. Air Force general in charge of Air Mobility Command, that noted warfighting component of America. And I say that with all the sarcasm I can possibly muster. I mean, they do important work, but they don't do dogfighting. They don't drop bombs. And yet he's the one out there saying, we're going to go to war against China. My gut tells me that we're going to go to war by 2025. And I want all my, people who are qualified with pistols to go out and empty a clip and it's 7 meters away into the head. I mean, that kind of thinking, just stupid, plain old stupid. So yeah, if you let General Minahan dictate things, hey, General Minahan, here's another thing, buddy. All the air bases that your AMC aircraft operate from, if you deliver things to China, you become a target. And emptying pistols into targets isn't going to help you when a Chinese hypersonic warhead impacts on your airbase. But now to the first part. I think it's not just the people of Taiwan. I think the Chinese government, everybody's looking at Ukraine saying, we don't want any of that. That is not what we want. I mean, China has always said they prefer a peaceful solution. Their goal with Taiwan is, about sovereignty issues. They would like to, have the Taiwanese economy be integrated into their economy, but that's not. I mean, China's economy is big enough; it can do well enough. They don't have to have the Taiwanese economy. Would it be nice to have the Taiwanese chip manufacturing capability? To a point, except China is basically, because of sanctions, building its own chip manufacturing capability that will meet or exceed Taiwan's capabilities shortly. So the key thing is, sovereignty, but they need a functioning state. They need, a viable state, and that won't happen after war. I mean, everybody's looking at Ukraine and taking a look at the death and destruction that's being dealt out there, and all parties are saying, we don't want that. The current Chinese government, of course, is one that has been promoting, a quasi-independent, status, encouraging visits by Nancy Pelosi and maybe later this year, Kevin McCarthy, things of that nature. But they didn't do well in the last elections in November. In the midterm elections, primarily local elections, didn't normally have a foreign policy component, but the president tried to make her cross-China, cross-straits policy a leading part of this election, and she lost badly. The Kuomintang party, the opposition party, did quite well, and now they anticipate that they're going to do quite well in the 2024 presidential election. And they're already out making inroads with China. They're sending delegations across the strait, meeting with communist Chinese officials to talk about a better future. Why is this happening? Because of Ukraine. Everybody's looking at Ukraine saying, we don't want a piece of that. And from the Taiwanese perspective, they're looking at Ukraine saying, the friendship with the United States and NATO didn't stop this destruction from happening. In fact, it probably enhanced the level of violence because of the provision of military equipment, etc. They don't want this. Nobody wants this. So I think that Ukraine is actually serving as the impetus for a peaceful resolution to the Chinese-Taiwanese problem, because all the United States brings is death and destruction. They don't bring any other alternative. And so I think people are starting to turn away from the United States. It's interesting. Garland Nixon, he's a radio and a talk show host, and he's politically active. He did a joke tweet that basically said, implied that because of Nord Stream, the Taiwanese were starting to go and look and see if the Americans had planted any explosives on Taiwanese chip manufacturing plants. The problem is that got picked up by the Taiwanese as real, and they're panicking, and the Chinese across the sea are panicking. Everybody's panicking, going, is America going to blow up the Taiwanese? And now people are asking, America, are you going to blow up the Taiwan? The point is, what started as a joke became real because America blew up Nord Stream. I know the New York Times says maybe it was a bunch of Ukrainians going on a little, vacation in the Baltics on a yacht. But no, the United States blew up the Nord Stream, and that's why it resonated. So even this joke tweet that Garland Nixon sent out suddenly became an international story, with the Chinese Foreign Ministry referring to it as they question the United States intent. So I think it also shows the hypersensitivity of this whole issue. So I think I answered the question.
Yeah. But Bono says, "Don't mess with Ukraine." Now, I know you don't think much of Bono as a geopolitical analyst, but just consider him in the realm of influence. There was a concert in London a few nights ago with the Ukrainian rock band, I think it's pronounced Anti-Tila, and they were joined on stage by Bono and The Edge from U2. Check this out.
I never pick a fight with someone who's ready to lose everything. I would not mess with the Ukrainians ever. All right. So we want to state that this is not just a war about territory or sovereignty. It's a war about decency and dignity, confronting domination and darkness. And we want decency and dignity to win for all of us. And that's why we're here.
So that's what we're up against. What do you think it would take to get somebody like Bono and some of these other celebrities to see the light?
I don't mean to laugh because this is a tragic situation. But he's so far detached from reality that it's not even funny. I mean, it's sort of a complicated thing when talking about these superstars with their billions of dollars, not billions, but millions of dollars, flying around the world in their private jets, hopping off with their designer clothes and their designer kit to go off in the safari, and they're driven in an air-conditioned SUV, and they hop out and they pose with the children and they pose with the refugees, and they sit there and they sing a song, and then they get back in and they go back and they jet set back to their 5-star hotel or wherever they're staying. It's a joke, man. It literally is a joke. If you want to do it for real, Bono, dump the stuff, get rid of the money, and go on the front lines with the UN aid workers. Go to the Sudan where you can have people coming in on an SUV and shoot you up. Spend the night in the tent where you have to drink water that could get you dysentery. That's real. All right, going up on stage with a Ukrainian band in London talking about dignity. I'd like to do the research of every member of that band. I don't know anything about them, but if they're from Western Ukraine, I can guarantee you they support Bandera. That means they're Nazis. So Bono, do you support the Nazis? That's a serious question, Bono. Do you support Nazis? Because if you're singing in support of Ukraine, you might as well be singing in support of the Nazis, because that's what Ukraine has become. And he needs to wake up. What's going to take to change his mind? Tragically, nothing. He's so far removed from reality, and so are all these others. Sean Penn. I love Sean Penn. I love his movies. There was a time when Sean Penn would actually call me on a regular basis and talk about Iraq. Because he was concerned about it. Then we talked about Iran because he was concerned about it. I get it. He has concern. Now he's concerned about Ukraine. But my God, Sean, really? You're going over there and you're going to sit down with Zelensky? Did you not hear what Zelensky said? Bandera's cool, man. Bandera's cool. Some people think he's a national hero. It's cool. Bandera killed hundreds of thousands of Poles, hundreds of thousands of Russians, tens of thousands of Jews. It ain't cool, Sean. It ain't cool. All the people surrounding him are Banderas. Hey, Sean, did you go to Lvov? There's a nice little restaurant there where they have Nazi SS memorabilia all over the place, and that's the place where Zaluzhny and company hang out. It's not cool, Sean. You shouldn't have given away your Oscar, Sean. Well, I mean, I understand Zelensky probably deserved it because he's playing a Democratic leader when he's actually not. So, gosh, you're right. He deserved an award. But these guys just don't get it. There's a real world out there. And here's another thing, Bono. The longer you support, I love how, again, here's a man who's never served in the military, has no clue what combat is, has no clue what pain and suffering is. He's never suffered in his life. He's been this rock star from day one. And he's sitting there saying, people who are willing to give everything. None of those idiots on stage with you are going to give anything. That's why they're in London playing music. Okay? If they returned to Kiev, maybe they'd get thumped over the head by the recruiters who are out kidnapping people to send to Bakhmut. Willing to give everything? That means they're willing to die. These guys aren't willing to die. A lot of people aren't willing to die, but they're all dying anyways. You know how many people died, Bono? How many soldiers have died? How many are going to die? How many civilians have been displaced? Bono is an idiot. I mean, I just hate to say, I love his music. I love his art. I've been a fan of U2, and I will continue to be a fan of U2. They play great music. That song he was playing in the background there, that Ed was playing,
Mothers of the Disappeared. Yeah, it is. Yeah, and it was I didn't play that part of it, but it actually was a great performance, and the lead singer of that band is also great. So this is what you're up against: great art, but the wrong message.
No, I mean, and that song is such an awesome song. I listen to that song over and over and over again because it resonates. It's a good song, but the wrong cause. Literally, the Mothers of the Disappeared. Do you want to know why they've disappeared? They disappeared because the Ukrainian government, with the backing of the United States and NATO, is sacrificing their sons and daughters on a battlefield that should never have been waged. Remind people from day one, Russia's the only nation that sought a peaceful outcome. Russia's the only nation that embraced the Minsk Accords. Russia. It is Ukraine that said that the children of Donbass will be hiding in a basement. It is Zelensky in 2019 said it will be a military solution. It is Poroshenko that said Minsk was a sham. It is Merkel that said Minsk was a sham. Holland said Minsk was a sham. It is only the Russians that believed in a peaceful outcome. And even when Minsk was cast aside in the fall of 2021, Russia still gave the world one more chance by putting forward 2 draft treaties that are serious. You know, God, the world would beg to have what Russia was asking for in 2021 today. Because you know why? 300,000 Ukrainian men would be alive. 20 million Ukrainian civilians would not have been displaced from their homes. Children will not have had their lives ruined. $1 trillion of economic infrastructure would not be destroyed. All the world had to do, all America had to do, is sit down at the table and tell the Russians, we've read your proposal and we want to talk about this seriously. But we didn't do that. Why? Because we wanted a war. We've wanted a war with Russia using Ukraine as a proxy ever since we invited them in 2008 to join NATO. How do we know that? Because the former U.S. ambassador to Russia, William Burns, the current CIA director, wrote a memorandum in early 2008 that said just that. Niet means niet. Russian red lines on Ukraine. If you invite Ukraine into NATO, you are crossing a red line that will prompt a Russian military intervention at some point, which will cost Ukraine their territory. We knew exactly what we're doing, yet we did it anyways. We're the ones who wanted war. We're the ones who wanted death. Hey, Bono, next time you get up and sing, don't blame the Russians. You want to sing that song? Sing it to Joe Biden. Sing it to Donald Trump. Sing it to Barack Obama. Sing it to Michael McFaul. Sing it to Victoria Nuland. Sing it to a whole host of American war criminals, but don't sit there and point a finger at Russia.
You know, it would be even worse is if we get a copyright strike because YouTube's copyright detection software detects that little guitar strumming the Edge was doing while Bono gave his rap. That would be even worse. That would be calamitous.
Why do you have to give him a hint?
Liza from St. Petersburg, what are your thoughts on the MH17 accident and the latest report from the Netherlands?
First of all, let's acknowledge that what happened with MH17, that's the airliner, the Malaysian airliner was shot down over Ukraine in I think 2014. Everybody on board died, hundreds. Is a tragedy, straight up tragedy. Why in God's name is civilian airliners flying over a war zone is beyond me. That's question number one that has to be asked of anybody. Who gave permission for that airliner to transit airspace in conflict? No one's really answered that question yet. But regardless, at some point in time, a Buk missile was fired by somebody that shot the airplane down. The question now is who fired the missile? Or there's an alternative theory that instead of a Buk missile, there was a Ukrainian airplane that fired an air-to-air missile. competing theories. Right now, the finding of the Netherlands court is that Russian-backed separatists fired the missile, but the evidence is not absolute, and the court was prejudiced against Russia's ability to defend itself. The United States promised, at least alluded to in court, to the existence of intelligence, but then failed to provide the intelligence to back it up, and yet that the illusion was admitted as evidence. I mean, that's strange. We got a murder weapon. Where's the weapon? We don't have it. Well, there's a murder weapon. Well, no, there isn't, because we don't have it. But we said we had it, but we don't have it. That's what the United States did. And, I'm not saying that Russia's innocent. I'm not saying that the Donetsk people are innocent. I'm not saying the Ukrainians are guilty. What I'm saying is that Dutch investigation, that finding of the court, is so corrupt and so, infused with, prosecutorial misconduct, judicial malfeasance, that you just have to throw it out and start all over again. And who's going to do it? There's so much anti-Russian sentiment in Europe today. There's not a single court in Europe that could be deemed to be a impartial, forum, jurisdiction for hearing this case. You can't do it in Russia because they're an interested party. I mean, where could you do this? You have to find a truly neutral ground with a court system that isn't corrupted by the West. Every one of those judges in that Dutch court are corrupted by the West. You can't trust them anymore. So that's where I stand on it. I'm not sitting here gonna say I know who did it. I don't know who did it. What I can say is the finding that's put out by the Dutch court is not reliable. It's politically corrupted, and frankly speaking, from a jurisprudence standpoint, they haven't proved anything. They haven't proved their case. That case that they put out there is so full of holes as to make it clear that this was politically motivated. It's not about justice. It's about achieving an outcome that finds Russia guilty no matter what.
Odious.
The village idiot. I'm not calling you that, Scott. That's the name of this person. The village idiot from Toronto. All right, just making sure. I need the weapons inspector's opinion on the Baltimore Ravens Lamar Jackson situation. The moment they announced the franchise tag, other teams made public announcements about not pursuing him. How would the weapons inspector prove collusion on the part of NFL owners?
I'm not laughing, but here's why I'm laughing.
No, not at all. That was not a laugh.
No. Well, it's just that in the lead up to the Iraq War, and I've also mentioned it here, I've talked about going out with my friends to Monday Night Football. And we used to do that on a regular basis. I guess we're all getting old and everything, but back when we were younger, we'd go out on Monday Night Football.
Speak for yourself. I'm still young and sexy.
You're still young.
And sexy.
Young. The other part's different interpretation that I'm not getting into. Okay. Okay, you're sexy, Jeff. But you got wine lips. Anyways, we would talk about politics leading up, and their big defense was, Scott, we don't have time. We work and all this stuff to learn about Iraq to the level you did. You did this for a living. You lived it 24/7. And that was a fair point. But then the game would start, and these guys would just start piling on the statistics on this, that, and the other thing. They had all the data down because they were all also involved in fantasy football. So they're following players and statistics, and they got lists and all that stuff. And I'm like, holy cow, that's like real-time research. When do you do that? Oh, we do it during lunch, during work. And I said, so you do have time. It's just that you care more about football than you do about the potential of America going to war against Iraq on false pretense. You care more about, statistics than the lives of American soldiers. And at that point in time, we decided, in order to retain our friendship, that we would cease this conversation. And I only bring that up because now you've brought up football. And I just have to say, I don't know anything about football anymore because I'm spending all my time on Ukraine and everything. I love the question, and I'd love to be able to answer it. But to be honest, I just haven't been following. I watched Miami lose in the playoffs, and it broke my heart again for the 400th consecutive year. And now when that happened, I hit delete on football, and I'm purely focused on this whole Ukrainian stuff, the emerging crisis in Georgia, the potential of conflict in China. And I don't know anything about that question. Now, we can put, I can't promise it though, because I don't know if I want to dedicate the amount of time necessary to research NFL collusion theories, but we can put an asterisk. I said it right.
Yes.
Next question.
As a maybe, we won't put the pressure.
And if I have the time, if I have a period of time in the day where I could just say, you know what, I'm going to answer that question. I promise if that happens, I will do it. But I can't promise that that's going to happen because my life has literally been from morning to night busy.
But Scott, remember, we just recently discovered there's a way that these two worlds overlap, the worlds of football and the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Do you remember our friend Tim Kirby, Russia?
Yeah.
Guess what? He's going to be our guest Sunday on our other podcast, Scenes from the Evolution. So folks, hopefully will tune in.
Kirby is Mr. Popularity all of a sudden.
That is correct. He is a professional football player from the U.S. in Russia right now. And he asked me if we would help him. Remember, he was saying they're looking for football coaches to come over from the U.S. or from wherever. So he asked me to push that a little bit more. So what the hell? Tim's our new friend. Why not? If you happen to be a coach or you know somebody who wants to have an adventure and they consider going to Russia for maybe a year to be an adventure, here's your chance. They're looking.
Other perks discussable. That's the one I want to pursue. I mean, I get the standard salary, free visa support, free flight, help with accommodations, other perks discussable. That's the one we have.
Not negotiable, but discussable.
That's right.
All right. So
it doesn't mean anything. We're just discussing it. It's not a negotiation. We're just discussing it. Hey, I'd like this. That's a nice discussion. I'm glad
you're not going to get it. We're really talking to you. All right. I don't know if you folks can read the email address there. It's timkirbyrussia@vk.com. All right. There you go, Tim. That'll be $50, Tim.
$50.
You can convert it to rubles, whatever. Ilian Stanchev from Bulgaria. Socialist Bulgaria had hundreds of tanks, planes, and artillery, but then we cut them to pieces, some of them for scrap, others we sold. Was it deliberate U.S. policy to militarily weaken former Warsaw Pact countries?
Well, no. I mean, there was this treaty called the Conventional Forces in Europe Treaty that was designed to walk Europe back from, the potential of conflict. Each side had tens of thousands of tanks, tens of thousands of artillery pieces, and all this. And when we decided, hey, instead of getting ready to go to war against each other, why don't we seek peaceful coexistence? Suddenly didn't make any sense to have all this weaponry. So we began a process of mutual disarmament where this material would be, taken apart, disassembled, etc. So, no. And then at some point in time, it just doesn't, from a cost effective, let's say that Bulgaria is joining NATO, which they did. You don't want to keep, old Soviet era equipment. In order to join NATO, you're supposed to upgrade to NATO equipment. That's half the allure. You see, you keep NATO defense industries in business by agreeing to buy their good equipment and get rid of that old Soviet equipment. So it's not designed to keep you weak or down. It just, you needed to upgrade. And you joined NATO, you made a decision, you want to be part of NATO, you got to upgrade, baby. You got to go to the NATO equipment.
Jackie Le Chevalier. You remember Jackie from Argentina. 2 unrelated questions, if I may. Well, sure, Jackie, you may. First, what's your stance on the Second Amendment? Second, how could we help the anti-war effort from our end here in Argentina? We got into the Second Amendment a little bit when Tim was our guest, and you didn't say very much, Scott. You were holding your cards close to the vest. Is that topic too hot to handle? I've never known any topic to be too hot for you to handle.
I believe in the Constitution of the United States of America. And I believe that the Supreme Court is the ultimate arbiter of constitutional differences. And I believe that sometimes the Supreme Court makes judgments that later on are reversed because society evolves. And I believe that the Second Amendment is a very hot topic, and it's one of those topics that's getting bounced around the courts. And I'm going to punt. Look, I'll say this. At one time, before my all expense paid vacation to Pennsylvania made it impossible for me to own or possess weapons, I owned weapons. When we lived in Louisiana, I believed in home protection. We bought a pistol at that point in time because there was a high crime rate there. When I came to New York, ownership of a pistol became very inconvenient because the laws changed. In Louisiana, if somebody broke into my house, I could shoot them, and as long as their dead body was on my property, the sheriff's deputies made it clear they weren't going to investigate. In New York, if I even hinted at shooting, I would be sued for gross violation of civil rights, etc. I mean, so states with different laws, the Second Amendment's treated differently in different states. I used to have a shotgun for hunting, but I stopped hunting a long, long time ago just because I stopped taking pleasure in killing things. And to be honest, I wasn't very good at it. A couple times I went out with Marina's father. He wasn't impressed with my hunting skills, so we made a decision that I wasn't going to embarrass myself further. But that's my extent. I never purchased an assault weapon. I never purchased a semi-automatic weapon, and I'm not condemning those who do. Each person has their reason, and the Second Amendment promotes that. What I will say is that, and this isn't a Second Amendment issue, but I'd say America has a gun problem. And what I mean by that is we have too much gun violence. Now, I know people say guns don't kill people, people kill people, but I'll tell you what, a person with a gun can kill a lot more people than a person with a knife. And we have a tremendous outbreak of violence that, has to be dealt with responsibly. And if you're a believer in the Second Amendment and the right to bear arms, I would hope that you believe in the right, that means the right to bear arms responsibly. And that it's not just a unlimited, all the rules go to hell because I got a Second Amendment and I can own a gun. Responsible gun ownership is, I think, a right and a privilege. But that's as far as I'm going to go, because now we're getting into the weeds about different gun policies and all that kind of stuff. And I'm just not equipped to do it. And frankly, because I'm not allowed to own weapons anymore, it's not my.
It's a non-issue.
Yeah.
Do you remember the other question that Chuck asked? There it is.
Oh, Argentina. How can you support? I mean, to be honest, I had a facetious answer that I won't say because people might not get my sense of humor.
I'll interpret. Go ahead. Don't be shy.
I was going to say invade the Falklands and watch what Britain does. But because they don't have an army anymore. They don't have a navy anymore.
Islands. Hey, the Falkland Islands.
The Malvinas Islands. Yeah. But that was a joke. Don't invade them. But what you can do is push back on the sanctioning of Russia, because the sanctioning of Russia is an extension of the strategic plan to defeat Russia. We had Kenneth Rogoff, the Harvard professor, Malvinas. I know, Mathen, I get it. That's why I didn't want to bring it up, because it's just a bad joke and everybody's going to jump on me, as they should. Thank you. But Kenneth Rogoff at the World Economic Forum in Davos said that the sanctions are designed to achieve regime change. So if you support the sanctioning of Russia, you're supporting a regime change policy, which means you haven't taken a neutral stance. A truly neutral stance would be, well, we're just going to keep doing business with those people we do business with regardless. And I think Argentina could play a role in that. And the other thing is to understand that the conflict in Ukraine is an extension of America's desire to retain global hegemony. And so Argentina joining BRICS, for instance, is a very good thing. And helping to promote multipolarity is a very good thing. And trying to bring the United Nations back into the fold of being a truly impartial forum for all parties instead of this club that's controlled by the United States. Ask yourself, as an Argentinian, when was the last time the United States threatened your ambassador to the United Nations with economic consequences if they didn't vote the way America wanted them to vote? And the answer is every time there's a big vote. How can you push back on that? by telling your government to tell your ambassador that when America comes and threatens you, to tell America to pound sand. I guess that's it.
All right. I was just reading this comment. Snarky.
About ammunition.
Yeah. The Constitution does not guarantee the right to cheap ammunition. Well, it's not really a constitutional right if you make it so expensive that average people can't afford it either. There. I knew that when Tim and I were getting a little fervent about the importance of the population being armed and you were being quiet, that you weren't totally sharing our enthusiasm. That's okay. KNV from Algeria. Prigozhin just said in a video that after the capture of Bakhmut, PMC Wagner will change from a military group to an army with an ideology. What do you think that means exactly?
I don't know. I mean, he's traipsing on the edge of treason. He needs to be careful. At the end of the day, he works for Russia. He works for the Russian government. He has an oath to Russia. He's not an independent player. He exists only because of Russia. So his army with an ideology, and that should be an ideology that embraces Russia.
Well, let's remember, I didn't hear it, but I assume he said that in Russian. So who knows how accurate the translation is? There are nuances.
Yeah, but he's implied that. Here's my thing about Prigozhin. Let me take a step back. He's not a stupid man. He's not somebody who has a false sense of who he is and what he is. So I think a lot of what's going on right now is purely designed for public consumption to help feed the media wheels here in America, to gin up headline stories in Newsweek magazine and elsewhere about divisions in the ranks of Russia, And the reason why I say that is he's the guy that had one of his guys go and get captured by the Ukrainians, and then when they recaptured him, to protect the fact that he had gathered a lot of intelligence, they staged an execution where they had him confess, and he had his head taped to a concrete block, and sledgehammer supposedly hit him on the head and crushed his skull, and everybody said that's Wagnerian justice. And then a little while later, he showed up and brought the guy out and said that was all a sham, that was fake, but this guy's a hero. He got a medal. Everything's good, which tells me that Prigozhin's capable of public theatrics to shape opinion on the other side, and maybe that's what's happening. If Prigozhin has political aspirations, he needs to be careful.
Anders Andersson from Sweden. Have you seen Wagner's movie The Best in Hell? Paradoxically, I find this movie packaged with modern war action to have a message of peace.
I have seen it, actually. I watched it, and I found it to be a very entertaining movie. What's interesting about it is that it mirrors Prigozhin's attitude towards the Ukrainians that he gives publicly, where he speaks of them as heroes. He says nobody can question the courage of the men we're fighting. These men died, but they're heroes. They fought for Ukraine. They fought for their motherland, and they deserve to be treated with respect. That's why he personally stands over the coffins as they're loaded with the bodies before they're returned to the Ukrainians. And he says words to them, and he's very respectful to them. And this movie was very respectful to the Ukrainians. There was a movie a while back about the 2008 Russian war with Georgia. I forget, Garcia, the actor.
Andy Garcia?
Andy Garcia played Saakashvili in the movie, but in the movie, they showed the Russians as comic book characters lined up, looking evil and marching in on all this kind of stuff. In this movie, both the Russians and the Ukrainians are portrayed as professional soldiers who fight honorably. I mean, there was no war crimes. There was no Nazi ideology. There was no, evil thing. They were professionals, and it was a movie about two professional forces engaged in a very complicated chess match of modern warfare. It was fascinating to to watch, especially the artillery duels, because it was very realistic how they
Well,
described.
that's what I was going to ask you about this. I'm playing a trailer from The Best in Hell. It looks realistic. It also looks extremely violent, and I'm not averse to that kind of realism, but I also want a story. So I don't know how the trailer represents the movie. Was there much of a story to it? All they show here is combat, combat, combat.
Well, the story, no, is about. Basically, the story is that they need to strike a target, but in order to do that, they have to get an air controller into a specific building at a specific height, so he can have eyes on target, so he can guide the aircraft in. It's all timed, so they have to fight their way through to get this guy to a building. So you have the mission, and then basically it becomes the chess match as the Wagner troops, which they basically call white, is fighting the Ukrainians, which they call yellow. That scene right there that you see where that soldier just puts the icon up there, that's a Russian soldier. But before that was a scene where the Ukrainian soldier came in and he put the icon up and crossed. And the whole thing is they're the same people. And at the end of the movie, after everybody died, you see the Wagner forces reconstituting themselves and the Ukrainian forces reconstituting themselves, and both sides are giving similar speeches about defending the motherland, fighting with honor, etc. And then they're going to go in and do it all over again. And so it's about the futility of war too, that war is just never-ending violence. So I just thought it was a really, really good movie. I know it's, people talk about it being Russian propaganda, but I'll tell you what, if that's a Russian propaganda film, they made the Ukrainians look really, really good.
Right. Well, I'll take your word for it that there's a good story to it. But you see what I mean about this trailer? I mean, like everything is just combat violence.
But that's what war is.
Well, you got to have a story. You told me there is a story, though.
But they're dying. I mean, everybody dies, man.
All right. I'm not.
Literally, everybody dies. It's just like, that's the whole thing. On both sides, you have these characters that they do a good job of getting you to buy into the character, so you're like supporting. But in an American movie, Saving Private Ryan, Matt Damon's character's got to live, or the movie loses all importance. Here, they have all these really good guys. You're like, yeah, he's dead. Damn, how'd that happen? He died, and there's no drama. He's just dead, like war. 1 minute he's the hero of the movie, next minute he's dead. Then they move on. And
everybody's asking what the name of the movie is. It's The Best in Hell.
Yeah.
We already did that. David from Sweden, in my mind, there's no doubt that Russia is going to denazify Ukraine. However, we know there are different Bandera cells in many countries all across the world. So what would the next step be? Should Russia be afraid of retaliation from those Nazi groups? Do you think Russia has any plans to handle the Banderites in other places of the world?
I mean, first of all, I agree. I mean, everybody I'm talking to, everybody has made it quite clear that this doesn't end without total denazification of Ukraine. And denazification is serious business. I'm not saying that I condone this from a civil rights perspective. I don't think you could get away with this in the United States of America, but there will be military law for a 3, 4, 5-year period where everybody who is tainted with the disease of banderism, who were involved politically, who committed crimes especially, are going to be subjected to a Nuremberg-like tribunal. The Russians are already building the cases. They have the files. And when this is done, there will be a trial. And it will be a very public trial. And it will be one designed to create the necessary legal and societal impression that these are evil people, that this is bad, this is an evil, odious ideology. And you do that, and then you hold them to account. Now, Russia doesn't have a death penalty, so I don't think this is going to be like what would happen in old days. I mean, one of the more dramatic moments in post-war Ukraine was when they they did a mass execution of the Nazis that they found guilty. They had them on trial. These are people who perpetrated crimes against the citizens of Kiev, German officers, and they found them guilty. Then they put them in the backs of trucks and they drove them to basically the center square where you literally have the citizens of Kiev surrounding, and they put them up, put nooses around their neck, and drove the trucks away, and they all hung them right there, killed them all. Same day justice. And you look at the people, and they're like, they're not cheering, but they're just looking at it going, yeah, that's justice. We now have closure. What these guys did to our city, what they did to our people, what they did to our families, we have closure now. I don't know if you're going to get that kind of closure with the new Russian laws, because they don't kill people. And it's not as dramatic when you just say, okay, off to the gulag they go. But there will be justice. And then what they have to do is they have to reform Ukrainian society. They have to put in place a system that pretty much mirrors what happened in Nazi Germany, where basically society was programmed that Nazis are bad, Nazis are evil. We don't do that kind of stuff anymore. And, because people, okay, well, what are they going to do about Lvov? All those Western Ukrainians in Lvov. I don't know. What'd you do about Nuremberg? What'd you do about Munich? What'd you do about Berlin? What'd you do about every place in Germany where Nazis, were given birth and sustained? You had to retrain everybody from the lowest level. It will take time. But here's the difference. There are active banderist cells everywhere. Here in the United States, in Ellaville, there's one down there. We got Victoria Nuland, who's a de facto banderist, is number 2 in the State Department. Canada has a huge banderist community. Chrystia Freeland, the Deputy Prime Minister, is a banderist. Germany has a lot of banderists. Australia has a banderist community. So you have this Nazi ideology and diaspora that's been mainstream into their respective societies, and they will never let this issue die. Liken it to, for instance, when all of the Batista supporters left Cuba when Fidel Castro came in. So today in America, how many years later now is it? 60 years later, we have a Cuban American community that continues to hate Fidel Castro and put pressure on the U.S. government to sanction Cuba, their own people. So you have Cubans hating Cubans in the name of ideology attached to a man who was a brutal dictator who fled Cuba, 6 decades ago, but it's still living today. So my concern is there's going to be all these Bandera people, and as long as the United States, Germany, and all these other nations continue to promote that what Russia's doing in Ukraine is bad, these people will continue to have an inroad into American policymaking, and this thing's just never going to go away. But that's not Russia's problem. Russia's not afraid of anybody. If you think that Russians are sitting there going, oh my God, there's some Bandera people in Canada, we're scared. No. And if they raise their head too much, let me just say that history shows when people in foreign countries get involved in the domestic affairs of Russia long distance, things tend to happen to them. And I'm not saying that I don't know what the Russians are going to do. I'm just saying that history shows that if your name is, for instance, Leon Trotsky, and you go off to Mexico and you are interfering in the internal affairs of the Soviet Union, that somebody comes in next to you with an ice pick and puts it in the back of your head. That kind of stuff happens. And what I'm trying to say is I just don't think the Russians are going to give anybody a free ride. Politically, you can do what you want. Russia's not afraid of political, opposition. But if you're physically doing things, that's a different issue altogether.
Well, you refer to this 3 to 5 year denazification process as though it's something that would be too brutal to actually fly in America. So I don't know if that means you don't consider it all that legitimate necessarily. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you do refer to the trials. It sounds like you think the trials would be legitimate, that they would really have high evidentiary standards to determine who's guilty and who isn't. Am I correct that you think that the upcoming trials will be legitimate?
100%, 100% legitimate. 100% they will find guilty only those who are guilty. And I'll give you evidence to back this up. The hardcore Azov people who committed horrific crimes, the really, really bad guys are still in prison. But if you're an Azov guy whose only crime was to have a swastika on there and have, to say I'm an Azov guy, I'm doing Sig Heil ideology and all that stuff, but you it couldn't be proved that you committed a crime, you were exchanged. Why would the Russians? I mean, the Russians, they don't have this knee-jerk thing that you're guilty of every crime in the world just because you joined Azov. They actually had a screening process, and if you were somebody who joined but you didn't commit a discernible, provable war crime, you were released. And I think that that's going to be the case too. That Russia recognizes that people get caught up in things. I mean, look, if you have a swastika on your arm, we see what the Russians are doing. There is a re-education program taking place, and there's been videotapes of where the guys who have the various Nazi tattoos go in and have the tattoos removed or covered up, and the whole time they're doing that, they're basically telling people, I was shown I see how wrong I was. I'm removing the symbol of hatred. It's no longer part of my life. Now they could just be saying that to get out of a tough situation, but the Russians aren't stupid. They know what to do. So I think the Russians would have legitimate trials. And look, Jeff, don't get me wrong on this. I'm saying it wouldn't fly in America. I'm not saying it's not needed. That's the thing. Nazis are bad news, bad news. And America has a history of doing things. Take a look at the birth of our nation and how we treated Tories when the revolution ended. If you were a pro-British person, what did we do to you? We killed you. We drove you out of the country. I'm not saying that was the right thing to do, but basically we had to purge America of pro-British influence, and we did that. Look at what we did to some of the fathers of the Confederacy and how we treated them, Jeff Davis and company. Probably wouldn't fly constitutionally, but it had to be done to purge America of a way of thinking that was fatal to America if it was allowed to fester. So it's a tough question, but just because I don't think a denazification program would be legally sustainable in America doesn't mean that I don't believe it would be necessary for Ukraine. The sickness of banderism in Western Ukraine is real. It's a disease that has basically insinuated itself every year that Ukraine continues to exist. Understand that in 2000, I think 16, 17, 18, they basically took all the children's youth movements and turned it into a banderist scouting program. So anything you do with children, let's say you wanted to have a piano recital for children, it has to go through the banderists who have to look at it to ensure that it conforms with banderist ideology. So the propaganda, the programming that's going on about this odious ideology, see, I read what the person said, is ongoing. So how do you reverse this? You have to find a way to deprogram people.
Odious.
That word.
Grogu from Belgium asks, the current attempts to explain the sabotage of the Nord Stream pipeline are ridiculous. Could this be an attempt by the USA to put the blame on Ukraine and thus have a possible exit strategy?
That's a good question and a good theory. There was on Twitter, I guess somebody was interviewing Seymour Hersh when this story broke. And so they were having this interview and he said, "Oh, let me read you the headline." And Cy was just like laughing the whole time. He was just laughing. He's like, "Oh my God, oh my God, oh my." They didn't really do that, did? Oh my God, oh my, which is true. Oh my God, what the heck were they thinking with this story? There's so many holes in the story, it doesn't even begin to add up. And I mean, have people looked at the pipeline that was constructed? This steel pipeline with 2 inches encased in concrete, etc. Do you have an idea of what kind of explosive charge would be necessary to burst that pipeline? It's a shape charge. It has to be specifically designed to the task and the amount of explosive necessary to do this. I dare anybody out there who doesn't know anything about explosives to try and, without Googling or whatever, just tell me how much explosive do you need and all that stuff. The answer is you don't know because it's a lot. And it has to be configured properly. And you don't just test it that day. It had to be tested elsewhere under similar conditions. This is state sponsored. That's what I'm trying to get at. This is something that only a nation state with sophisticated capabilities could do. And yet they want us to believe that 5 Ukrainian/Russian dissidents went on a Baltic holiday, sailing on a yacht to carry out, this sophisticated attack. There had to be at least 4 devices planted, assuming that the one pipeline that didn't go off, it was a dud. It didn't happen. Or else, what's going on? Why blow up 3? Leave the 4th one on alone. Each one of them requires deep water diving support, which means you're going to need decompression support capability, some way to manage because of the nitrogen imbalance, etc. Was the yacht modified for a decompression chamber? Seymour Hersh writes about the specific requirement to bring in a decompression chamber and modify the ship that went out to deploy this. Was the yacht? Where is that? We don't know. They didn't mention it, so I'm thinking it didn't have it, which means nobody on that yacht went down to the depth necessary to put the explosive on there. They say explosive traces were found on the ship. That's a curious term. As a former inspector who used to go around and swipe buildings for explosive traces, that means we now go and take the swipe, we go to the lab, we get the specific chemical breakdown of that trace. Why is that important? Because the Swedes have said we found explosive traces on the bottom of the ocean next to the places. So gosh, now the Swedes have that. You should be asking the Swedes to cough up their explosive traces and compare it with your explosive traces to see what the similarities are. Now there will be some differences because the Swedish explosives are traces that occur after the explosion. So you'll have to reverse engineer it from that standpoint, but you'll still be able to find out if it's the exact same explosive. And the thing is, the stuff on the ship should be of such a quality that you might be able to get a tracer in it, find out where it was produced, how it was produced. That's where these stories fall apart. You see, they come up and they say things, but then when people like me come in and start asking the questions, they don't have the answers, which means none of it's true, and none of it is true. Every aspect of that story is fake. It's a lie. Now here comes the interesting part. Why would you tell the lie? You would tell the lie to shift attention away from the Biden administration, who is panicking, by the way. I can't prove the cause and effect relationship, but Olaf Scholz flies to the White House, is taken away, and has a one-on-one meeting, nobody around, between just him and Biden. That doesn't happen. You remember when Trump met with Putin, but he had his translator there, how he was criticized? You only have your translator. Where's your note takers and all that kind of stuff? At least he had a translator there. Biden's meeting with Olaf Scholz and nobody's around. No one. It's just them. What are they talking about? I don't know. But then the next day, the New York Times gets a front page story that's just pure BS about the boat. Biden's in a panic because Seymour Hersh doesn't mess around. Seymour Hersh is onto a story, and the U.S. government's figuring out that Seymour Hersh's source is probably somebody who knows everything. And Seymour has promised to keep writing on this issue. So as this story comes out, as he puts out the next version, the Biden administration is going to be boxed into a corner where their guilt in terms of violation of the Constitution is going to be so evident that even this sleepwalking Congress will be compelled to impeach him. And the Senate can't ignore it. So they put the story out. So now you create plausible deniability. You can say, well, Seymour Hersh said this, but look, these 5 people, they did diving too. Seymour Hersh said divers went down there, but these guys did diving too. Different kind of diving. One is fictional, the other one's real. But here's the fascinating part of the question. Why finger Ukraine in this? Because look what's happened. Even the Germans had to come out and say, if Ukraine, if it is found to be complicit in this, we have to reevaluate our entire weapons policy towards Ukraine. And I think across the board, people are saying if Ukraine truly did this, we have to reevaluate things. And what you're doing is you're creating an opportunity for countries to ratchet down their weapons support to Ukraine at a time when everybody knows Ukraine's going to lose the war. Everybody knows it. Jan Stoltenberg, the Secretary General, said, we run out of ammunition this summer, and that's it. In a war that's defined by artillery, and one side has a lot of tubes with unlimited ammunition, the other side has fewer tubes, and they're going to run out of ammunition. The fewer tubes, no ammunition side loses. So Ukraine's going to lose this war this summer, no matter what happens. So how do you now that you've boxed yourself into courses, we're going to support Ukraine forever, never back down, double down, do everything, give them weapons, all that stuff. But now they're going to lose. So you're just going to end up looking stupid, create a cover story that implicates Ukraine. And now you can say, I don't know if we want to support these guys anymore. They blew up a critical piece of European security, energy security infrastructure. That's the theory, at least. I've seen the Germans make noise about questioning the provision. We'll see if it resonates, or else, it's just a story that's designed to go nowhere. We'll see.
Cy Hirsch, by the way, has jumped on the Let's Pay Tribute to Daniel Ellsberg bandwagon while he's alive. Let's pay tribute to Daniel Ellsberg while he's alive bandwagon is what I should have said. He's a longtime friend of Daniel Ellsberg, so check out Seymour Hirsch's Substack. It's a great article. Timur, this is from somewhere in Russia. I know that is, but I'm not even going to try to pronounce it. How do you say that, Scott?
Novosibirsk.
Novosibirsk. Oh.
It actually plays a very important role in my book. I inspected a Soviet SS-25 ICBM site facility near Novosibirsk, but more importantly, that's where I tell the story about how the Russians thought I was a pilot, and I was in the seat of the plane, and they had turned control of the airplane over to me, expecting me to land it. And as we approached the airfield, we're both sitting there watching the ground come up at us, going, is somebody going to land this damn airplane? And by the time they realized that I wasn't a pilot and then we were going to die, it made for a very interesting landing. So Novosibirsk was almost the place where I lost my life.
All right, then. So this question resonates for you. Timur from Novosibirsk, since the UN as an international platform is obviously not working properly, what tools and organizations can be used for maintaining meaningful worldwide dialogue going forward? P.S. Would love to see Mr. Inspector here during his tour next year.
P.S. Timur, Novosibirsk is on the list of possible places where Mr. Inspector might go if and when he tours. So yeah, no, I'll be in Novosibirsk.
Okay, great. Let's go to the next question.
Wait. I didn't answer the first part.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. What tools and organizations? Look, the United Nations, unfortunately, is a fundamentally broken institution. The United States has made it so. I know the United States blames Russia, blames China, but the bottom line is it's the United States that controls everything in the United Nations. I've been invited to speak at the United Nations several times now. I've been invited by the Russians to go and appear on various panels to address the Security Council. And I'm vetoed every time by the United States because they just simply don't want any opposition voices to go before that forum. So what's going on? Well, there's the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the SCO, that's gaining some credibility. There's basically the United Nations is supposed to be this multilateral place, but it's become a place that the United States seeks to dominate unilaterally. And so what's happening is the world's finding alternatives to the United Nations. And so other nations that are like-minded get together in organizations, and they behave in a manner which is consistent with the United Nations Charter. So they're fulfilling the goals and objectives of the United Nations, but they do it in a manner, in a form that the United States can't interfere with. And so we're seeing that break up around the world. That's why forums like BRICS is so important. They create sort of economic connectivity so that people start aligning economically, which means they align politically, which means they come together and they discuss problems and they have problem solving in a multilateral fashion, but the United States doesn't get to veto it. So I think that's what's happening right now. And that's too bad because I used to work at the United Nations, and there was a brief period of time. The United Nations Special Commission, the organization I work for, there were inspections where I had Russians, Chinese, French, British, and Americans, the entire Security Council on my inspection team, working cooperatively towards a common goal that everybody agreed on should be accomplished. So it can work. But then the United States blew it by saying, yeah, you guys go do that cooperation thing. We want to get rid of Saddam Hussein no matter what, even though that's not what the United Nations is about. And the whole system went to hell in a handbasket.
Michelle Hansen from Vancouver, Washington. Hold on, let me just soak that compliment in. Man, why such a fleeting moment? Jeff, you are awesome.
Jeff, you are awesome. But I rock.
You do rock. Michelle Hansen from Vancouver, Washington. I recently read about neo-Nazis Sarah Beth Clendaniel, I guess that's pronounced, and Brandon Russell, who have ties with the Azov Battalion, being arrested for planning to damage the Baltimore power grid. And today I read about 3 substations shot in the Pacific Northwest. Why do they want to attack power grids?
Well, I mean, the quickest way to disrupt society is to take out the power. For instance, if somebody hit the substation that's located down the road here, this podcast would end instantaneously because we wouldn't
That's
have.
Worse than a copyright strike.
It is worse than a copyright strike. A power grid strike is worse. So if you want to disrupt society, just imagine. I mean, everybody, just think about it for a second. When the power goes out, life sucks because you can't do anything, especially if it goes out at night. But it's not just about communication. Your refrigerator is full of stuff. Freezers. I remember we had a lengthy power outage about a year and a half ago or so. We had to drive around to buy ice to pack our freezer with ice because otherwise we were going to lose about $500 worth of meat that was in there that was quickly going to go bad. That's because the power is out. We had, the power lines down. The power company was down there taking days to put this stuff back together, and we didn't have days. We were running out. So that's why people take out power, power supplies. That's just personal. Now, if you want to disrupt government functions, understand that governments can't communicate. They can't operate. They can't collect data. They can't disseminate data. They can't do anything when the power's out. Nothing works. We are a society that's driven by electricity. Now, some places have, backup generators, fire stations, police stations, and all that would give you a modicum of power support, but society as a whole ceases to function. This is why the Russians are taking down the Ukrainian power grid, because it basically disrupts everything. And I would imagine that's why people with antisocial values, terrorists, whatever you want to call them, would target substations here in the United States.
Well, who knew the Ritters were such ravenous carnivores? Or maybe just Papa Ritter is. $500 worth of meat.
Well,
it's like a year's supply.
No, it was maybe a week and a half supply at that time.
You must be getting very good meat.
Wagyu steak, baby.
All right.
No, we just buy it in bulk because it's cheaper that way.
Oh, all right. Nikolai Zabalin from Moscow. I fear that somebody may want to silence your voice for telling people the truth. Can the U.S. government proclaim you a foreign agent? For instance, if some Russians donate even a small amount of money to ask the inspector, can it serve as a pretext? I say if we want to do a test, donate a lot of money, then we'll really test it.
I mean, screw it, man. If we're going down, we'll go down big. Let's not do a little bit of money. Let's just make it so damn obvious. Hey, Nikolai, find an oligarch and tell him, I don't know, 15 million. Put it in there and let's see what happens. If somebody want to silence my voice, you're damn right somebody wants to silence my voice. They've been trying to silence my voice for years now, and they will continue to try, etc. On the financial side, you just got to be smart. I mean, there's laws. You don't break the laws. You don't even dance around the laws. The laws are the laws. And, for instance, if there's a sanctioned party in Russia, you can't take money from them. That's against the law. But even if they're not saying, the practicalities of donations, I don't know how it works. We haven't sought donations. I'm not seeking donations. I don't want donations from Russia because we don't know the legal picture. I mean, but the key thing about breaking the law is there has to be intent. Now, apparently, if an oligarch puts $15 million into our account, I have announced our intent. But
don't ask, don't tell.
That's only to test. That's only to test whether or not it's a problem. But a little donation, a little here, donation here. I mean, if it happens now, but first of all, I'd be curious how you got it to happen, because my understanding is there's no connectivity between Russia and us that can provide this kind of donation. And but no, I don't think that's going to be a problem. I have to actually go out and willingly, with intent, seek to violate U.S. law before somebody could use that to silence me. What happens is this: we used to receive a wire transfer from Russia. RT used to send a wire transfer in, and it would get stopped by the bank every single time it happened. And I would have to go in and file all the paperwork to prove that this wasn't a violation of sanctions. And then they would release the money. Not a lot of money, but enough that I went through the rigmarole of each time and doing that. But that's what happens. It's, it's just not as, we're not trying to break the law. We don't want to break the law. We have no intention of breaking the law. And the other thing is, if the Russian contribution that's legal is going to be made, please do it so that it's worth my time to file all the paperwork. I don't want to do it for 15 cents.
Good answer.
Do it for 15 million.
Salam from England. I fear that that was
That's
what we
the same
just
one.
did. All right. AH, Hawaii. Who is the Khazarian Mafia? Where do they live? And how are they involved in geopolitics? And will they put millions of dollars in our bank account? Oh, no, sorry.
The Khazarian Mafia is a term that's used for basically, this is what we're going to do, Jeff, because the answer I'm going to give is very controversial, and I need to make sure that I'm 100% correct with all of my facts before I give it. So we're going to hit reverse, and we're going to put an asterisk next to this one. I promise I'm not avoiding it. This person knows this is a controversial question, and they
want
know
to get it right. You don't want to get on the Khazarian hit list also. You're already on enough hit lists.
Well, I might be on the Khazarian hit list if it's what I think it is. But because it could be attached to anti-Semitism, we have to be really, really careful with how I answer this question. So I need to make sure that I have all my facts up, but I'm not avoiding it, because sometimes people ask this question because the tendency for most smart people is to run away from the answer because it can create problems. But because this is Ask the Inspector and we run away from no legitimate question, I will answer this question, but asterisk, great French cartoon. Yes, absolutely. But we're going to put an asterisk next to it.
All right. And just to be clear, you are opposed to anti-Semitism. That is your position, correct?
I'm 100% opposed to anti-Semitism, but I'm not opposed to, for instance, I am not a fan of AIPAC. I'm not a fan of the Israeli government buying American congressmen. But the fact that I just said that, some people will say that you are anti-Semitic. I am not.
What about my annoying relatives? If you agree with me that they're annoying, that wouldn't be considered anti-Semitic just because they're
Are they Jewish?
Yeah. Well, that's the only way the question makes sense.
No, that's not anti-Semitism.
All right. Thank you for giving that such careful thought. Musti, or maybe even Musti from Algeria. Many good men and great leaders have been taken down in the past, and we know it. Why are the dangerous leaders we have now not worried about the same consequences? Why are most of the populations of the world just insensitive to their bad and dangerous decisions?
Good question. I think he's alluding to the fact that we have many leaders in the West, and former leaders and current leaders, whom many parts of the world view as war criminals. I mean, almost every American president in modern time can be described as having committed war crimes by certain segments of the global population. I think the Iraqis have a solid claim against, we'll start with George H.W. Bush. I don't really support that claim, but I understand how they could make that claim. Bill Clinton, I support that claim 100%. Madeleine Albright, 500,000 Iraqi children. That's a price we're willing to pay. No, Madeleine, they're paying it. You never paid it. You're a war criminal. I think George W. Bush, the invasion of Iraq, that's sort of a war crime. Barack Obama's ongoing assault against Iraq, the empowerment of people to murder Iraqi civilians continuously through drone strikes, etc. That's a war crime.
What about the peanut farmer from Georgia? You didn't mention him.
What crimes could Jimmy Carter have committed? Oh, I know what one. The Brzezinski plan in 1978 to create conflict in Afghanistan for the deliberate purpose of helping draw the Soviets in. So you are literally entering a plan that you know is going to kill 1 million Afghanis, but you're willing to do it because you have a larger strategic objective. That's a war crime. So yeah, Jimmy Carter. I'm sorry, man. Got to own it. But the bottom line is, you can say all this. Why aren't the Americans? I mean, if everything I'm saying is true, and I believe most of it is, why aren't the American people saying, "My God, these are war criminals"? Because we've bought into the system. The system takes care of us. And as long as we are consumer society, baby. And as long as we have this cocoon of comfort wrapped around us and we're all rocking, the government rocks us carefully, and we can buy certain electronics at Christmas, and we can have $500 worth of steaks in our freezers, and we can do all this other kind of stuff. We don't want to rock the boat. We're happy. We got ours. And the fact that you're not getting yours isn't my problem. So we support our leadership. We don't demand of, it's not that we support the individuals at the top, but we support the system, because the system, for many of us, seems to take care of us. The people that don't support the system, homeless, people no health care, people have been abandoned by society. But there is a large enough segment of society that just is blind to all that because we're getting ours. I mean, that's sort of the theme of America. As long as I get mine, I'm okay. I don't care about anybody else. I might pretend I do. To make myself feel good, I might go out and join the Sierra Club so I can put a sticker on my car. And what's that called? Virtue signaling. I can do all that virtue signaling. I can put a Ukrainian flag on my social media. I can do a whole bunch of stuff, but it doesn't make me a good person. It actually makes me a hypocrite, because I claim to support something, but I don't dedicate myself to it. Instead, I'm just here getting mine, living my life, living high. And as long as the government allows me to sustain this, I don't really care what they do over there, especially when over there, and this is a harsh statement, but it's true, is being done against brown people. We don't cry. I mean, I get sick to my stomach sometimes and I don't like to watch this. It's like, Jeff, you were talking about war movies, and you're like, yeah, I don't like the violence, even though if it's real.
I didn't say that. I said I don't like it if there's no story with it. I don't mind the violence.
Right. Well, yeah, but my thing is, every once in a while on Twitter, I'll be scrolling, and suddenly somebody will put up a video of the Yemeni children, and I'm talking about living skeletons who are screaming in pain because they're dying of hunger right in front of your eyes. And I can't look at this. I got to scroll on past. I can't look at it. But it's there. It's there. It's happening right now, and we're the ones responsible. The people of the United States are responsible. We're the ones who allow our government to empower the Saudis to carry out this genocidal war against the Yemenis, and the people, the children are paying the price. And millions of them are at risk of dying. Thousands of them are dying every day. And we're blocking the support. We sanctioned. We're doing Syria had an earthquake where people are still suffering from the earthquake, and we won't allow a suspension of sanctions so humanitarian support can go to the people of Syria. We suck as a nation. And and when I say we suck as a nation, I'm not talking about the government. I'm talking about us, the American people, because we see this stuff, but we turn a blind eye to it, especially if they're brown people, because apparently brown people don't suffer like white people do. Brown people have a higher tolerance for pain. Brown mothers don't cry as much when their brown children die because they're brown. They don't care. They're not really human. That's our approach, and it disgusts me to no end. 500,000 Iraqi children. That's what Madeleine Albright said. Would she have said that about 500,000 German children, 500,000 Kosovar children, 500,000 Serbian children? No, because they're white. 500,000 Iraqi children is the price she was willing to pay. Any human being who says they're willing to see 500,000 children die should be put in jail And if you have the death penalty, they should be executed.
Hoo-ah!
All right, well said, Inspector. Ann Moss handling the backstage duties tonight and doing a great job. Why don't you line up some live questions, Ann, coming in on YouTube and Facebook?
I have a live question.
Excuse me?
I have a
We're
live
talking
question.
while you're interrupting? What?
It says the Scott Ritter Show.
Oh,
There's one.
what did you want to say, Scott, that couldn't have waited 10 seconds for me to finish the sentence? Go ahead.
Wow, I've been put in my place.
Look at him. Now he's going to cry. All right, I'll finish while Scott sheds a tear. I just wanted to remind folks that we do stream live also on Twitter, Twitch, and Rumble. But as far as the live comments go, we can only insert the comments coming in from YouTube and Facebook. And before Scott interrupts me again, I want to also remind folks about the American Drink Tank, our Facebook group, for folks who like to discuss important matters, maybe even solve some societal problems while they're enjoying adult beverages. And you can get a link to that on our Substack. And also, if Scott doesn't mind me plugging one more thing, his autograph book is now available. And you can go to scottrittermerch.com or link to it from our Substack. All right, Scott. Now, everybody wants to know what it is you wanted to say. I'll just sit back and
I'm intimidated, Jeff. Do you mind if I say something? All right, here we go. I was going to say that we have an additional source for live questions. And that source is sitting over there named Voldemort. And I've been asked to answer a question that came direct from this room. So,
excellent. And you don't want to identify the questioner, or you already did? Is the person you identified simply relaying the question, or is that person also the questioner?
Yes.
Okay. Let's go. Let's do it.
The question is, what the hell's going on in Georgia, and why is the United States sticking its nose in the affairs of the Georgian government? So there's the question.
We have somebody who doesn't know who you're referring to.
Voldemort is she who shall not be named, live on TV or podcast or whatever we call this social media. So the question deals with about Maverick has a question. Yes, it's Maverick who asked the question. If you haven't been watching what's going on right now, there's massive demonstrations in the Georgian capital of Tbilisi, where the youth of Georgia, together with others, have come out in protest against a decision by the Parliament of Georgia to sign into law legislation that required organizations or entities in Georgia that have received at least 20% of their money from foreign powers to basically they have to register as agents of a foreign power. It's modeled exactly upon the Foreign Agent Registration Act of 1938, I believe, here in the United States, maybe 39. I have to go back and check that last digit. But it's the same law. So here in the United States, we say that if you receive money from a foreign agent to advocate on their behalf or to carry out their policy, you must register as an agent of that nation. But in Georgia, apparently, that law is inconvenient. And the United States, Samantha Power, the director of USAID, Agency for International Development, the State Department official responsible for that area of the world who was touring in Georgia, they've all come out and said that this law threatens democratic society in Georgia. Imagine a law that calls for transparency of foreign funding threatens democratic society in Georgia. And you have to ask yourself, why would that be? Well, the answer is quite clear, because the U.S. Agency for International Development is all about soft power. It's about carrying out a color revolution. Even if we don't want to give it a color, we can call it the invisible revolution. But if you take a look at the 22 current programs that are funded by USAID to the tune of around $40 million a year, they are all about bypassing central authority and creating a bottom-up approach to seizing power. They talk about empowerment of local communities, primarily through things that the Georgians don't want, such as respect for diversity. Now, I'm not sitting here saying that the Georgians are right. In the United States, we have a very liberal approach towards transgenders, towards gays, towards queers, towards LGBTQ, that group, the rainbow group. We basically say, rightfully so, this is America. Everybody has rights. Everybody has rights. And all those rights have to be defended. But there are societies out there that don't belong to America who are much more conservative in their approach. And Georgian society is a very conservative society that isn't necessarily willing to embrace the same progressive approach that we take. So what we do is, rather than respect that, we go in and we create, through funding, grassroots institutions that empower this diverse approach. And then we create election systems that allow them to seize control of the election mechanisms so that they can push their people up to carry out a coup d'etat. That's what it's about in Georgia. We are carrying out a coup against the Georgian government, which we feel has for some time now been leaning towards Russia, not doing what we want. Another thing that we've done in there, and it's curious, we are using social media and digital communication platforms as a way of dominating the information space. If you see the United States talk about creating societal resilience against disinformation, that means basically shutting down everybody who doesn't agree with American policy and only promoting American policy. And so that's what we're doing in Georgia as well. And if it was just the soft revolution, I'd still be pretty angry about it. And if I were Georgian, you should be mad, because that's basically an outside power sticking their nose in the business. But here's the deal. The people that are celebrating this, that are out there demonstrating against this law, they think that the United States and the European Union and NATO care about them, that they want to be part of this great club. You remember Borrell, the foreign policy guy in Europe? He spoke about the European garden. And these people think that they are part of the garden. They think they're carrots or celery or something. They want to be part of the garden. You're not. You're weeds. You're in the jungle, baby. You're not in the garden. You'll never be in the garden. All the United States wants you to do is participate in what we call the crescent of crisis, an arc of instability around Russia. We use that name. Rand Corporation has written studies about this. We don't view Georgia as this nation that we want to be friends with and help them rise up to meet the same standards of living we do. We view you as this point where we can have crises designed to destabilize Russia. And what is it exactly we want them to do right now? Create a second front against Russia to divert Russian military attention away from Ukraine. A second front. So that's why these students are out there shouting, Sukhumi, Sukhumi, Sukhumi. That's the name of the capital of Abkhazia that was taken over by the Abkhazian rebels back in 1993. They're calling it unconquered Georgia, which implies that Georgia needs to go and conquer it. Now, to conquer it, you would have to have a direct military conflict with Russia. The last time Georgia had a direct military conflict with Russia was in August of 2008. It was a 5-day war that did not end well for Georgia. They got beat very badly. Pro hint to all those Georgians out there who have seemed to have forgotten their little lesson in history. You're going to get beat badly. Look at Ukraine. 300,000 dead, $1 trillion+ of infrastructure damage, 20 million people displaced. The nation ceasing to function as a nation state. It took Russia a year to do that. Russia would be able to do that to Georgia in less than a month. Some people say in just a matter of days. Georgia doesn't have that much critical infrastructure. Russia has a lot of cruise missiles that it can spare on Georgia. The Georgian army is 4 brigades. 4 brigades. Each brigade, 3 of the 4 brigades are light infantry brigades. That means that they can't do anything. They're light infantry. If they go up against a Russian armored brigade, they will all die. And they will all die anyways. Even the 1 brigade, the 4th brigade, is a mechanized brigade. But it's not a heavy mechanized brigade. It's sort of a light mechanized brigade. It will die too. The Georgians don't have sufficient military power to defend against Russia, let alone carry out offensive operations against both Abkhazia and Ossetia. So the people saying that they want to open up a second front are saying they want Georgia to commit suicide. Now, let me remind the Georgians what will happen when you commit suicide by opening up the second front. You will forever lose Abkhazia. You've sort of forever lost it already. But I take this personally because that's where my wife was born. That's where my wife was raised. That's where her family lived. They lost their home. They lost everything. She would like at some point in time before she dies to be able to return to Abkhazia, to her homeland, to visit where she was, maybe even to once again reside there on vacation, maybe a retirement home. Who knows? She has every right to want that because that's her homeland. She's not a tourist. She's not an outsider who was kicked out. She was born there. She's a Georgian. She's from Abkhazia. Sukhumi is her hometown, and she can't go there right now because of stupid people like the ones who are demonstrating in the square saying stupid things about going to war against Russia, which Georgia will only lose. And when you do that, you will lose Abkhazia forever. It'll be gone forever. South Ossetia, probably already gone forever, but you will guarantee it will be gone forever. But if you think that's where it's going to end, then you haven't taken a look at what Russia's done in Ukraine. What do you think is going to happen to Poti? I know Poti. You don't know about America? Look at a map. Hey, if you don't know about America, then why is your government seeking to have a war in Georgia? You might want to learn something about the country that we're encouraging to go to war against Russia. Learn about a little bit more than Kinkali, Khachapuri, and wine, because that's all we know about Georgia. We don't know anything about it. But Poti is an important seaport. It's where the U.S. Coast Guard has sent some naval ships that we turned into the Georgian Navy. Russia will take Poti, and along with it, Guria. Guria is a province in that area. Connectivity from Abkhazia to Guria goes down to a place called Ajaria. Now we're talking about the entire Black Sea coast. Georgia's going to lose the entire Black Sea coast because Ajaria is Muslim. And under the Kars Treaty, Article 6, back in 1925, when Turkey and the Soviet Union stopped fighting about it, Turkey guarantees the autonomy of Ajaria. And if the Georgians are committing suicide, Turkey will come in and take it. And if you take a look at the Turkish maps that they published recently, guess what? Ajaria is colored in the same color as the rest of Turkey. So you're going to lose Ajaria, you're going to lose Guria, you're going to lose the whole Black Sea. But that's not it, because the Russians now are going to come in and take Gori. They're going to take Kutaisi, create some connectivity. Georgia will cease to exist. Is that what you want, you little Georgian nationalist pukes? You want to destroy your country? You want how many casualties are you willing to take? You know, fortunately, in that 5-day war, you suffered about 150, 160 dead. That's tragic for the families of those who died. But compared to the 300,000 Ukrainians that have died in combat, that's a drop in the bucket. But now, if you want to go to war with Russia, open up that second front, give me a number. It's going to be big, guys. It's going to be really big. Now, it probably won't be any of the punks demonstrating because those pro-American punks all have passports and they'll flee the country like cowards always do. So there will be a bunch of boys in the farmers' fields in Georgia right now doing the work. We're going to be called up and sent to die because of the stupidity of the idiots in Georgia who take the American dollars and don't want to admit it. See, that's why they're rejecting this law, because they don't want to have to say, oops, we're bought and paid for by the United States government. They don't want to admit to the Georgians that they don't care about Georgia. All they care about is enriching themselves with American dollars. They're corrupt as the day is long, and they're bad for Georgia. You're bad for Georgia. You know who's the friend of Georgia? Russia. Want to know why? Because Russia lives next door to Georgia. And for centuries, Russians and Georgians have learned to live peacefully with each other. Yes, there's been some problems. I'm not saying the Russian policy in Abkhazia is perfect. One only has to look at, Suslov's definition of what Abkhazia should be used to disrupt Georgian nationalism. One only has to look at the KGB creation of the Mountain Federation and take a look at what happened from 1992 to 1993 in Abkhazia to say the Russians ain't perfect. We know that. But that was Boris Yeltsin. That was then. Vladimir Putin inherited a situation, and he has dropped hint after hint after hint that there is the potential of a negotiated settlement, but Georgia cannot be a member of NATO. But Georgia continues to commit suicide by pretending they want to be a member of NATO. Georgia keeps saying they want to be part of the European Union. Draw the connectivity between the Europe and Georgia. Show me how that works, Georgia, on the little economic map. Can't. You know what I can do? Draw direct connectivity between Russia and you, especially in terms of energy pipelines, your rail network, the whole thing. Russia, just go look at Pushkin. wrote about Georgia. Lermontov wrote about Georgia. Russian and Georgian cultures like this, like this. They're your friends. They don't want to hurt you. All they ask is that you don't be part of a crescent of instability, that you don't buy into an American program designed to use your country to basically destabilize Russia. All the Russians ask you to do is be good neighbors. And if you're good neighbors with Russia, guess what? History shows they'll be good neighbors to you too. You know, America won't. Hell, nobody here in my neighborhood, if I brought out a map and said, point Georgia on the map, hardly anybody could do it. Tell me something about Georgia. Nobody can do it. I'm throwing out names of places, Kutaisi, Abkhazia. You know, I can talk about Svaneti. I can talk about Guria, Ajaria. I can say, Khaketi. I can throw out all these names. People are going to go, I don't know anything about that. I say that to a Russian and go, yeah, we got that. We got that. We know it. Russia knows Georgia. Russia lives next to Georgia. They've been friends with Georgia forever. We're not. We're using Georgia for our own selfish purposes. And when we're done with it, guess what, Georgia? You'll be flushed down the toilet of history, just like Ukraine is being flushed right now, just like the Afghans were flushed, just like the South Vietnamese were flushed, just like the Kurds were flushed. You're nothing to us. We don't like you. We don't care about you. We're going to use you. Then we're going to dump you. And if you don't realize that, I'm sorry, man. But you know what? Normally, I wouldn't get so emotionally involved in this, but this is my family. This is my wife. This is her family. This is their history. And you're just basically shitting all over it. And I've had it. I'm done with it. That's why I'm going to call you out, Georgia. I'm calling out to everybody in that square. Shame on you. That law should have passed, because then the whole world would know how you sold your soul for the American dollar. But you don't want to admit that. You're going to hide behind it in the name of democracy. Well, it ain't democracy when an outside power comes in and seizes control of your country. And that's what America's doing right now. Seizing control of your country. Anyways, that was the question for Voldemort, and I answered it.
Yeah, it was nice of Voldemort to ask a question on behalf of your wife. You wouldn't think a guy who looks like that would be capable of such sensitivity, would you? Very flattering shot.
Harry Potter.
All right, Ann, what do we have from our beloved audience in the way of questions coming in on YouTube now? Sega Iris, thanks for the donation. Why does Scott Ritter, in his account of the course of hostilities, never take into account the influence of U.S.-appointed Russian oligarchs?
I think I've always taken them into account. I think I spoke of the iron grip that the oligarchs had on the Russian economy during the 1990s, and how they influenced the policies of Boris Yeltsin, and how the United States used the oligarchs to basically rob Russia of its wealth while controlling the politics of Russia to keep Russia weak, to keep Russia down. I've spoken how the U.S. And Great Britain sought to use the oligarchs to control Vladimir Putin, and then also how Vladimir Putin basically told the oligarchs that while I recognize the role you play in the economy, you cannot get involved in the politics, and how the one gentleman whose book I have, whose name I will butcher because I butcher all Russian names,
like I butcher his.
Khodorovsky, I think he is, oligarch, fled to London, was in prison for a while. He decided to call Putin's bluff, and he engaged in a massive fraudulent scheme, tax evasion, tried to seize power, turn that into political power, and Putin put him down. And Putin will put all the oligarchs down. He tried to put all the oligarchs down, but they're very difficult to put down because they do have a tremendous, connectivity to the Russian economy until we sanctioned Russia. And we did Russia the biggest favor in the world. Two kinds of favors. One, we helped Russia divorce itself from the West economically. This intertwining of Russia's economy with the Western economy that had taken place in the 1990s and continued throughout the first decade and a half of the 2000s, Putin couldn't untangle from that. If he tried, he'd have 20 to 30% of the Russian population rising up against them, because these are the people whose entire livelihood depended upon this interconnectivity with the Western economy. But then the West does a complete sanctioning, wham, a divorce overnight. Not because Putin did the divorce, because the West did the divorce. Now you got a whole bunch of people in Russia forced to learn how to reconnect with the East. Now, it's a little bit difficult. A lot of people aren't happy about it, but they can't blame Russia. They can't blame Putin. It's the West that did it. And then the other beautiful thing, and Putin sort of bragged about this in his February 21st speech, is how the West went in and just seized everything that the oligarchs took out of Russia. And Putin went, all you guys who made your money, took it out, living in your yachts, living in this, don't come to me and ask me to stand up for you and support you in your trials, in your court cases. You're on your own, but we're done with you. You ain't coming back. And now he's telling people that as Russia seeks to grow economically, that they encourage people to invest in Russia, but not, if you get the money that you make in Russia, it has to be reinvested in Russia. You can't make money in Russia and leave Russia with it. That was the old way. The new way is make money in Russia, reinvest in Russia. That means it's the death of the old oligarchs. There might be a new oligarch class forming up, but it'll be an oligarch class that is totally tied to the state, loyal to the state, because their wealth depends on the state, and their wealth be reinvested in the state, which ultimately gives the state tremendous leverage. Because no matter how powerful you think you are as a business leader, if you screw with the state will tax you to death. The state will come in and take care of this problem. So I think this is going to be healthier for Russia. I think this is why the Russian economy is doing so well, because we've basically removed all the obstacles that were keeping the Russian economy dysfunctional. And it's the biggest favor the West ever did. I mean, I just laugh right now. I'm watching Angus King. He's the senator from Maine. And I've been watching him because he's the independent. He's the reasonable man, Angus King. He's a very reasonable man. And he asks the reasonable question. He hates Russia like you wouldn't believe. He's out there, Russophobia, sanction this, sanction that, sanction this, sanction that. But suddenly he now has to hold a panel where he brings them all in and says, why didn't the sanctions work? Why did it backfire? Why did we suck at this? Everything we did didn't happen the way we wanted to do, and Russia's getting bigger and better. And you have all the people up there trying to explain. And it was funny because Angela Stent, who's one of these, I call them Putin whisperers. She's a former national intelligence officer for Russia with the U.S. intelligence community. She's currently a professor at Georgetown University, where she teaches people about all her brilliance from Russia. And she finally had to come out. Here's a woman who was articulating in favor of sanctions, She finally has to admit, well, the Russian economy is actually pretty good, and they know what they're doing. And we didn't know what we were doing, and the Russians beat us. The first honest thing that came out of a U.S. intelligence officer's mouth in a long time. The Russians are pretty good at what they do. They're better at it than we are, and they beat us. That's the sanctions policy in a nutshell.
All right. Reminding folks that we'll be in Texas at the end of the month. You can get all the details at scottritterextra.com/uncanceled.
Can I ask a question, Jeff?
Yes, please.
Okay, I just didn't want to interrupt you. I apologize.
No, I like that you're deferring to me. I think you should.
I am deferring to you.
As such. Yes.
I'll even genuflect if necessary. Am I arm wrestling, Ryan? Is that in the agenda, or is that?
Yes, it is. I don't know that we have the exact time and place of it, but that's a priority. I think that's the reason thousands of people are flocking from all over the country to attend these events.
It's really going to happen?
Well, I don't understand. Why do you even doubt it? What's this all about? And by the way, don't forget to bring the Georgian wine that you lost in the bet.
Oh no, I got the wine for you. We already got that part. But
that means you have to check your luggage.
Here's the thing about the arm wrestling with Ryan. I ain't taking my shirt off. All right. He can strut around half naked all he wants. I'm keeping the shirt on, and then I'm going to pin his ass down, and then we move on. Okay.
It sounds like you want people to beg you to take the shirt off. Why would you even mention that? Who brought up? Who expressed any interest in seeing you take your shirt off? Name one person.
Ryan.
No. He never. Just, do you usually check your luggage and stuff like that? You'd have to. That's the only way I think you can bring wine with you.
I'll have to check luggage to get there, or we can find a wine store in Texas that sells Georgian wine, and I'll buy it there.
I only bet you a glass of wine, so whatever.
Okay, I'll take care of it. Don't worry.
Who is going to take responsibility for the Ukrainian people? Refugees, war widows, orphans? Will the U.S., European Union pay for their livelihood and compensation? What do you say, Scott?
What do I say?
2 question marks, not just one.
Let me put it this way. If it was left up to the European Union and the United States, all the Ukrainian women that have fled the country will become prostitutes because we don't care about them. All the children will become homeless in the streets, become drug addicts, drug dealers, and the scourge of society because we don't care about them. We will not help the Ukrainian people at all. Zero. Maybe there's Ukrainian communities around the world that can absorb some of them, bring them in, but the world is tired of Ukraine right now. We're exhausted by the Ukrainians, and the cost is too much. You know who's going to end up doing this? They don't want to, but they're going to have to do it. The Russians. The Russians, because the Russians are good people. They actually have a heart. They care. They have a soul. Now, I know a lot of Russians are sitting there going, no, we're not. You're full of shit, Ritter. We're not going to pay for this stuff. Yes, you are. You want to know why? Because you care about Ukraine. Because you care about the Ukrainian people. You always have and you always will. And at the end of the day, you are going to make sure that the nation that was part of the Soviet Union, that has the shared culture, the shared heritage, doesn't suffer. And so you're going to do what's necessary to help the Ukrainians back on their feet. And it's going to be painful. It's going to be expensive. It's going to hurt. But you're going to do it because you're good people. That's it. We're not good people. We don't care about the Ukrainians. I've said it. In Georgia, it's the same thing. We don't care about you. We could care less about you. We just don't. And we're going to screw you. We're going to dump you. And we're going to abandon you. Look at the people of Afghanistan. Remember, for 20 years, we said we cared about them. Do we care about them now? Do you know that every 2 hours, all those assholes, I'm sorry my language, man, but all those assholes, we got to go to war for the rights of Afghan women. You dumb shits. You don't care about Afghan women because if you did, you know that every 2 hours an Afghan woman dies in childbirth. Do the numbers. Add it up. So you don't care about the Afghan women. You abandoned them. They're now in there. No one cares about them. We don't care about. We're using Afghanistan as a tool to hurt the Taliban, which means we're using to hurt the Afghan people. We don't care about them at all. Zero. Nothing. And we don't care about the people of Ukraine either. We're going to abandon them to their fate, whatever that is. Just like we abandon our homeless, like we abandon all the disenfranchised people here at home. We don't give a shit about anybody. If you're not part of the system, if you're not part of that which generates income that helps the elite, we don't care about you. We discard you. So, you know who's going to step up? The goddamn Russians. They're going to do it. They don't want to do it. They shouldn't have to do it, but they're going to do it because they give a damn, because they care. I think Russian people actually go to bed at night worrying about this shit. We, on the other hand, we're worried about fantasy football. You know, are the NFL people going to be able to do extra? I'm not making fun of the question. It was a good question. It's a fun question. But my point is, that's our level of excitement. But we don't lose any sleep over the fact that 20 million Ukrainians are homeless right now. Refugees in countries that don't want them, can't afford to keep them. We don't lose any sleep about that. You know, never mind.
All right, let's just take a couple more questions. Joe Hickey, a regular viewer. I remember Joe. Hello, Joe. What are the reports of Russian nuke subs toying with the USA off the east and west coast and disappearing? Is this true?
Just a second.
By the way, this is at Scott, in case anybody thought it was directed at anybody else. So, lest you be confused.
Shoigu. Yeah, man. Sorry to bother you again. Quick question. Those submarines you got, yeah. Why the fuck you going off the East Coast, West Coast? You toying with us? Knock that shit off, okay? Yeah, thank you. All right. Shoigu says he'll not do it again. I don't know. I mean, I'm sorry, Joe. I take the question seriously, but I just thought it would be a funny way of saying that I don't know. You know, I don't know if those reports are accurate or not. I mean, I would imagine that the Russians are their navy's getting stronger. Their submarines are now in a position where they can basically start these patrolling. And some of the patrolling would be in a way that replicates what we do. Because you have to understand that we take our submarines and we take them right up to the Russian coast. Why would we do that? Well, here's why. Because if I want to carry out a first strike against Russia's strategic nuclear forces, especially their mobile missile bases or their silos, I bring in my submarines close to the shore where I can fire my missiles on a flatter trajectory and they're going to hit their targets sooner. And so we can come in, and if we surprise the Russians, come up and go whoosh, a bunch. They can't shoot them down. We hit the targets, we decapitate their capability, and we get them thinking about this. And so that's what we do, Aaron Swell. We bring a boomer out there and then we just pop it up off the coast and tell the Russians, here we are. And the Russians go, holy crap, if they fired, they'd hit us within 10 minutes and it's all over. And then we disappear again. So the Russians are like, well, two can play at that game. So the Russians will bring their submarines in, pop up off the coast and go, we're here too. And we go, holy shit, they fire their missiles, flat trajectory, it's all going to die. And we go away. So they're both playing this game, I believe. It's a stupid game. It's a dangerous game. And it's one I wish both sides would stop doing. But you can't do that until you get an effective arms control agreement in place. You can't do that till both sides have a mutual recognition that it is a stupid game, that nobody needs to be playing this kind of stupidity. And then we can begin to lower the threshold of stupidity by agreeing, for instance, that we're not going to run submarine patrols off the coast, that submarines will actually operate in areas further away as a confidence building measure. So that, I mean, if we go to war, the submarines can then disappear and move. But basically, I told you, the Kurds, we dump them as well. We flush everybody down the toilet. We don't care about anybody. We don't like anybody. We only like ourselves. But anyways, submarines. I would prefer, I think the submarines are some of the most destabilizing weapons out there. And I have yet to see an arms control position that says get rid of all submarines. It's sort of the one that everyone wants to hold on to in the end because they're so destabilized. I say get rid of them because they're probably the most dangerous weapon out there because of their survivability, because of what I just said. They can come up a coast and fire in a flat trajectory and hit targets quicker. The weapons we should keep are the ones in the silo. Why? Because we know where they are all the time. They're right there in the silo. And I'm in favor of de-targeting all these silo missiles. So they're in there, but all the targets are eliminated from the guidance system. So that in order for us to use them, we have to retarget them. And then I'd be in favor of other things, like I'd like to take the warheads off of them so that we have the missiles in the silo or in a facility near the silo. And then if we ever have to feel like we have to use a missile against the North Koreans or some rogue actor, we tell everybody, hey, we're going to take this missile. We're going to put the warhead on. Russia, come over here. You can supervise us with the warhead on. And we do this and we put it in the silo and we fire. But what we're doing here is making sure that there's a whole bunch of time between the decision to use a nuclear weapon and actually using it. So hopefully sane people go, we don't want to use it. And as soon as we get enough sane people to say, now that we don't have nuclear weapons on a hair trigger alert, they're not as useful as we thought they were, and they're very expensive. Why don't we just get rid of them? And that's how you get to nuclear zero, ladies and gentlemen. You make the weapons not useful, not attractive, not convenient, inconvenience. And unfortunately, we don't have anybody talking like that right now, except some idiot in Del Mar, New York, drinking Diet Coke out of a cup.
All right, I think that's a good place to leave it for this week's episode of Ask the Inspector. Once again, the events that were scheduled in Oakland on March 18th and 19th have been postponed. Stay tuned. We'll reschedule them as soon as possible. Scott and I will be in Texas on March 28th, 29th, and 30th. Go to scottritterextra.com and click on Uncanceled for more info about that. And if you would like your very own copy of Scott's new book, autographed by the author himself, go to scottrittermerch.com. Northern Nevada, thank you. And thank you, Balugi. And thanks to all our beloved audience. Ann Moss did a great job backstage. Thank you, Scott. And you want to say one more thing? Take all the time you want, Scott. It's your show. Go ahead.
I just have a question, Jeff.
Anything, my good friend.
Explain what American Drink Tank is.
American Drink Tank is a Facebook group that is designed to attract people who like to, instead of just getting drunk or whatever, doing nothing useful while they're unwinding, to devote themselves to trying to address societal problems. We're not encouraging people to drink. We just recognize that a lot of people who are very successful, very busy, maybe they work 70 hours a week, it's too much to ask them to do additional work on behalf of that. So let's get them while they're unwinding and let's accomplish something. That's what it's all about.
Am I supposed to be doing something with this? That's why I'm asking. Am I dropping the ball somehow?
Just show up and make sure that you arm wrestle Ryan.
Okay, so now American Drink Tank is what we're doing in Texas.
Yeah.
But you said a Facebook group.
Well, I know it's a Facebook group that it's like a think. It's called American Drink Tank, like a play on words, a think tank. It's our version of a think tank, but instead of just the usual kind of policymakers, we're tapping into a larger talent pool. You look confused.
Okay, so I am confused. All I have to do is show up in Texas, and American Drink Tank works.
That's correct. That's all you have to do is show. Well, you also have to take your shirt off.
No, that isn't going to happen. We would lose
Very
the audience.
All right, let's just check in with Bharat and see what he has to say about that.
You have a very gentle face and a very erotic physique.
A very what?
Erotic physique.
Oh, well, there you go.
I got one more Bharat clip. Remember when Andy Kaufman used to wrestle women? You might want to borrow a page from his book if if you're afraid to take on Ryan.
I can hold a very large woman down for up to 3 hours.
I was looking for an excuse to insert that. I'm sorry. It was
You found it.
Yeah, sort of. All right. Join us next Tuesday for the lightning round of Ask the Inspector. We do that every Tuesday at 3 o'clock Eastern. Scott answers every question in 3 minutes or less. And we'll be back here as usual next Friday. And on our other podcast, which is Scenes from the Scenes from the Evolution, Sunday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And our guest is Tim Kirby Russia. Thanks, Ann. Thanks, Scott. Thanks, Voldemort. Thanks, beloved audience.
Thanks, Ann. Thanks.